person. I have Emily Thiroux Threatt as an author, podcast host, a facilitator of the Grief and Happiness Alliance. I love that. In life, we all experience grief, and much of the time we feel alone in our grief and we don't know where to get help. Emily was like that when her husband Jacques died. And when her second husband Ron died, grieving was still tough, but she was much better prepared for it. She'd been through some stuff. So, through her personal experiences, she authored Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief and the Grief and Happiness Handbook, offering compassionate guidance for reclaiming life after loss. Emily's work extends to the Grief and Happiness cards. I can't wait to get them. And the Grief and Happiness podcast, where she shares insights on navigating grief with resilience and finding joy amidst the journey. Emily, thank you so much for your patience during our opening silliness, and welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, yeah. So we're talking about, in my opinion, a subject, grief, death, that I think is, I don't know if I want to say it's a taboo subject in our culture, but it kind of is. It's awkward. So what inspired you to write the Grief and Happiness Handbook and your other book too, right? Which I happen to have sitting right here because I've had it a while.
Oh, good.
Yeah, living and loving through grief. So what inspired you to write the book? Give us a little bit of your background history.
Okay. I taught writing at the university level for many years, and Ron died. He was my second husband to die. When he transitioned, I started writing for myself a lot because I didn't know what to do at that point. He had lived on Maui long before he knew me, and when he realized that his transition was going to be coming in the relatively near future, he really wanted to go back to Maui to live. And so we came here, and I'm really glad we did. It was a wonderful 2 years before he did transition. But when he did, I wasn't really hooked up with the island yet because I'd been, oh, excuse me, I'd been taking care of him and being with him for those 2 years. And I thought, what am I going to do? What am I supposed to do now? I'm in a different place. Um, my life is totally changed in so many different ways, and writing was comfort for me. So I wrote quite a bit, journaling, sort of writing every day, first thing in the morning. I still, every day, first thing in the morning, I do my writing. And I realized that things were helping me, that I was writing. And I thought, as a teacher, a writing teacher, no less, I thought it would be good to invite people who were dealing with grief and loss to see how they could use writing to help them too. So I started writing through grief, a program, and at first it was on ground. I put a notice on Meetup because I didn't know that many people on Maui, and said, if you want to learn how you can use writing to help you with your grief, come on over to my house, and they did. And it was really a wonderful experience. Well, during this time, several months after Ron transitioned, a really good friend of ours just died suddenly. And he lived on the mainland. His family lived a couple blocks away from where we lived in Ventura, California. And when he died, he was so much younger than we were. I was very concerned about his wife because she wouldn't have had even the thought of what would happen if my husband died. And lots of people give lots of different kinds of uh, help, they think, to people who are in that situation. A lot of times it's not helpful at all. And I wanted to help her navigate through all that somehow. And so I decided I would write her once a week for the whole first year of her loss. And each time write a little something that would help her in some way that was related to her grief. So once I decided to do that, I thought I better make a list because I'm not sure I can come up with 52 different ways to help somebody when they're dealing with loss. And I sat down and I actually kind of easily wrote the list of all the different things that I could think of. It helped me, it could help somebody else, different ways to help. And I got to looking at it after I wrote it and thought, that as a writer, I said, this is an outline and it would be an outline for a book. So I uh, decided to get an agent uh, and write that book with 52 chapters, one for each one of the cards. And that turned out to be way too long for one book. And so we divided it into two books. So Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief has 26 chapters, as does the Grief and Happiness Handbook.
That is that's wonderful. It's a wonderful story. I always feel that there's some sort of naturalness to it, out of our hearts and out of our desire to help or whatever we're going through, that to be able to reach out and help other people. Um, I just thank you for that. And I think everybody needs to hear it, right? I think that we need some help. When, because you have lost two husbands, and I, I, I want to ask this question. I kind of think I know the answer, but we all deal with a certain amount of grief where there's going to be a time when people die, right? Things go away, whatever the deal it is. But the death of a spouse, I was thinking about this the other day. What are some of the unique challenges of the death of a spouse? Because you're really in each other's lives, is what I want to say. Yeah.
Yes, I understand that question. And it is different. I've had lots of people die in my life, a whole lot. My parents were much older when they had me. And so not only have they been gone for a very long time, the rest of my family, there's only a couple of us left. I actually talked to one on the phone yesterday, and we were talking about that we're glad that we can still talk to each other because people just aren't there. But as everybody knows, your relationship is different with anybody besides your spouse or your partner, whoever that is that you spend most of your time with. um, Even breathing the same air, sleeping in the same bed, that constant companionship. And when that goes, it's just a shock to your universe in a way that all those other griefs, uh, I had them, all
Yeah.
different kinds of losses you grieve from. But even with all those, it's just totally different with a spouse when you suddenly find that you don't have somebody to talk to, those, just little things, little conversations. You don't have somebody to hold your hand or give you a hug when you need it.
Yeah.
The physical kinds of comfort that feels so good, and you really lose that a lot. But most people that I've talked to who've lost a spouse feel that it's life changing. Your whole world changes, and it's a lot to get used to, and it's important to pay attention to. You can't just go in your bedroom and close the door and let the world go on. Well, you could, but that wouldn't serve you. Wouldn't really help you at all. So that's kind of the way it is. I know with me, both times it was that way. After Jacques died, we'd been married for 22 years, and I just didn't know what to do. He'd been sick so long. And one thing that happens when people have an illness that lingers is at the beginning, all the people support you and they're there for you. And the longer you're sick, the further away they get. And by the time both of my husbands were, the last 2 years of their lives were very challenging. Ironically, they both died from the same thing, and I didn't have any idea the second one was going to have that when we got together. So that a lot of the experiences were similar. But when he died, I felt alone. Tons of people showed up for his celebration because lots of people loved him, but they were showing up for him as opposed to showing up for me. And they didn't show up for me afterwards. It's like they'd already
Wow.
dealt with that and they were going on with their life because they've had a long time to be dealing with it. Yet for me, everything was fresh and new. And I spent a lot of time just sitting, uh, not having any idea what my next step was going to be. So that was hard to get through. I finally found a really good way to get through it that helped me a whole lot. And it made me open up to the rest of my life so that when I did meet Ron, which I had no intention of ever getting married again, but when I did meet him, I was able to be open to a new relationship. And that was really great. So I had a lot of like experience that was kind of ammunition after Ron died, knowing that he was on that path. I was doing preparatory or anticipatory grief. And when he died, I kind of felt the same way right at the beginning. There's a shock to your system that you have to adjust to.
Yeah.
And it's not instant, even though you think you're prepared, it doesn't just happen instantly. But I was able to start writing in particular that really helped me through after Ron died. And I have really become an advocate of using writing for that.
Wow, I so appreciate you sharing all that. Um, dealing with grief myself and also knowing, having lots of clients dealing with it now and through the years, we really need these conversations. Um, I think it's very, very, it's one of those things where I actually have people say to me, Loretta, how do I help someone? What do I say to them? Because people don't know what to say. And they'll say something like, well, I'm sorry for your loss, or, well, now they're not suffering anymore, or they're in a better place, or, well, death doesn't really exist. They say these things, and it's not really helpful, is it,
That's
Emily?
right. It's not helpful at all. And it can unintentionally be hurtful.
Mhm.
And I think that that's the thing to keep in mind when you go to say something to somebody who's dealing with loss. And I always say that the best thing that you can say is to talk about their loved one.
Yeah.
And you can say something like, uh, I'm really going to miss Ron. I really loved how inspirational he was. And whenever we'd have a conversation, I'd it just feel refreshed and renewed in my path and what I wanted to do because our conversations would be so deep. Can you imagine having somebody say that to you, then he's rather than saying something like he's in a better place? Because
Yes.
for me, the better place was with me, not off away from me. So it's a think before you speak sort of a thing, and think about what you'd like to hear. And people, you a lot of times people don't use the person's name or don't talk about them because they're afraid they're going to make the person who's grieving sad. Well, guess what? They're already there. You're not going to make them any more than they are. And people really do love to hear about their loved ones. And if you can't think of something to say, and we've all heard that saying, don't say anything at all, but be there, listen, hold their hand, let them talk, or let them sit in silence with you, feeling your support.
Yes. Yeah, I want everybody to go back and write this down somewhere and really, really, I really mean it and really take a look at it so that you understand that I agree with you. Um, Having someone say, yes, wow, what a beautiful person. he or she was, and here's a memory, or the other part of this, and we're going to take a station break, and then we'll probably come back and talk more about it. But the other part of this for me is how, kind of like what, when it happens, people show up and then they disappear. And I'm going to leave this as something for us to talk about when we get back. This idea that are you over it? You're over it, right? Yeah, you're done, right? You cried and now we're done grieving. And um, I know you have a lot to say about that. We're going to take a station break, but one comment I'm going to say is you never get over it. You don't. And it changes and evolves. So anyway, I want you to speak to that, but we're going to take a little station break right now. This is Loretta Brown. My amazing guest today is Emily Thiroux Threatt. She has written a couple of really great books, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief, and the Grief and Happiness Handbook, which she's got pictures of behind her there on her screen. And please don't go away. We have lots more to talk about. We'll be right back.
All right, all clear.
Well,
Do you make a positive difference in the world? Do you have a talent, philosophy, base of knowledge, product, or service that you know could help a lot of people if only you could reach them? Join Alternative Talk 1150's family of broadcasters and start walking down a fruitful path. As host of your very own program, dial 425-653-1150 and find out just how affordable it can be to have a show on 1150 AM. That's 425-653-1150. Alternative Talk, we have an opportunity waiting just for you.
Energy is powerful. It's all around us, mysterious, full of potential. Directing positive, healing energy to raise your vibrational rate through Reiki can change your life. Reiki Master Loretta Brown has relieved stress, sadness, anger, and even helped clients lose weight, stop smoking, and end sleep disorders. Worldwide, people have sought out Reiki Oasis. If you want help with your dis-ease, visit ReikiOasis.com. Harness life's energy. Visit ReikiOasis.com today.
Every person with a disability deserves equity in education, employment, and their community. Sherwood Community Services takes pride in serving all people with disabilities and their families since 1957, including in rural areas and non-native English-speaking communities. Sherwood provides service in Snohomish, Skagit, and Island counties. Sherwood is open for referrals for telehealth and virtual support for children and adults with disabilities. To find out more, visit sherwoodcs.org. Sherwood, believing in abilities.
Multicultural, multidimensional even. Alternative Talk 1150.
Yeah. Y'all ready to come back in?
California is a big state.
Yes.
All right, stand by.
Ready to come back in. Oh, that's lovely. Welcome back to the original Loretta Brown Show with my wonderful guest, Emily Thiroux Threatt. And we are talking, she's the author of Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief and the Grief and Happiness Handbook. I want to remind everybody that these shows are recorded and you can download them for free at the archives at 1150 AM KKNW, the original Loretta Brown Show. We're also on iTunes, Podcast One, Spotify X, Megaphone, YouTube, and Audible, and all over the place. So please go and check it out and listen to the show again, and be sure to watch the other shows. I've got lots of great shows, and I always try to bring something that will help you, and you can reach out to my guests and get help from them or read their books, right, which will really help you. So yes, so we're talking about what happens when someone dies, and there's a certain awkwardness around all of that. And where do you want to jump in there, Emily? Because I was saying some things before the break, and I know you can speak to it. Yeah.
There's so much to speak to in this sort of a thing. And I think awareness is a really big thing to think about. you mentioned how long you grieve, and people ask me that all the time. And a lot of people have something made up in their minds of what's appropriate and what's not. I had one person tell me that they only had like 2 days of bereavement leave from their job. And when their loved one died, they were able to have the day of the funeral and the day after, and then they had to go back to work the next day.
Yep.
And when that person went back to work, sitting at her desk, she had a hard time. She was kind of sniffling and had the tissue there by her, and she was doing the best that she could, but it was almost an impossible situation. And her boss came over and he said, "Aren't you over that yet?"
Oh.
And I thought, my gosh, how could anybody be so insensitive? But people are, especially people that haven't dealt with a lot of loss themselves. And some people have the kind of personality that they're kind of egocentric, and that what happens with other people doesn't matter a whole lot. But like that person's output toward her job was more important to the boss than that person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when anybody asks me how long grief lasts, I say, as long as you're still here, because whoever it is that you loved is still going to be in your heart the whole time. But it's a different kind of intensity. And that's a really important point to think of. I had somebody just the other day that she said, when somebody told me that grief lasts for the rest of your life, I was overwhelmed. I thought, I can't do this for the rest of my life. But it's not the same thing as that immediate grief that comes with loss. And it evolves in the process. And you get to the point where you can just have a moment. Like Ron and I had a song, and for a while that song was popping up all over the place. It was on TV, actually two different TV commercials at the same time. It was during when the show Blackish, which we used to watch together and really enjoyed, their final episode, that song played them out. And tears come at times like that, and that's okay, because you still have that. But that doesn't mean that you have to dwell exclusively in that. And that's why I brought happiness into the equation, because I kept seeing people, they were trying to deal with their grief to feel better, but they didn't have a specific goal. And so through Marci Shimoff, wrote a book called Happy for No Reason. And I had read that and I thought, this is what's missing. That people aren't dealing with happiness. They don't think that they can ever be happy again once they've lost a loved one. But you can, and you can grieve and be happy at the same time. And I've built everything that I'm doing now. It started with just grief in general, but now it's gone toward grief and happiness. And when I tell people that I'm happier now than I ever have been, they're really surprised, because they said, "You had 2 husbands die. How can you say that?" And in my heart, I know they'd want me to be happy.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that in what I feel that I'm doing to serve others has brought me that kind of happiness that just keeps constantly expanding, and I look forward to that. Doesn't mean that I miss them any less. Doesn't mean that they're not, or that they're going to come back into my presence or something. That's not what happens. But I find different ways to help deal with that can help people. So don't feel like it's a life sentence, so to speak, to be dealing with grief. It's a love of your life that you get to keep.
Yes. Wow, that brought so many things to mind. First of all, you can be grieving and you can be happy at the same time. I want to dive into that in just a minute, but I want to make this comment. So many people come to me and they're hanging on to their grief because if they let that grief go, there's some kind of a tangled idea that they're letting that person go, or they're being disloyal to the memory of that person or something. Yeah. Can you comment on that?
That's
Yeah.
so true. It becomes
Mm.
your identity that you're the widow.
Yes.
And I know that after Jacques died, I told myself that people weren't contacting me because they were thinking of me like as the Black Widow. And that was something I made up, you know.
Wow.
That
Okay.
wasn't really true, but it just it
Right.
came to me, and that's kind of where I stayed. And when I felt like they were seeing me as a threat in some way, I was not comfortable in reaching out to them. I was waiting for them to get it and see that it's okay to, I'm still here, I'm still me, love me. But at the same time, when you're thinking of yourself as untouchable, then that's what you become.
Yes. Untouchable, the Black Widow. Wow. That's quite the realization there, by the way, Emily.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost like you've got it written across your forehead or something. And so, this idea that you can be happy and grieving, and yeah. So, what kind of things we were talking during the break about the lack of self-care sometimes, like when people are in active grief or this very potent shock, that happens right at the beginning, where they can't get out of bed, they can't think straight, they can't put two sentences together, they don't brush their teeth. What can someone do to help themselves during that time? Or if you know someone that's grieving, what's your advice?
My best advice is with something to do something, because it that sort of feeling, that sort of isolation comes from not doing something. If you want to do something for somebody, what popped into my mind when you said that was that I was sitting in my house after Ron died. I wasn't getting out. I just, it was kind of beyond me to figure that out. And one of my friends just dropped by one morning and she said, "We're going to the beach." I said, "Well, I don't know." Yeah, she goes, "You're going to the beach." She didn't take no for an answer. She knew that I wasn't being up and around very much, so she brought a beach chair that she could put in the sand, and she went for a walk, and I sat in that beach chair and just watched the ocean, and just breathing in that air, seeing that beauty,
Yeah.
kind of relaxing in a way that wasn't happening inside my house because my house was full of grief.
Yeah.
And I needed to step away from that to catch my breath.
Yes. Yes. I love that, by the way. Oftentimes people will do things like say, "Well, how are you doing?" And
Don't
I
say that.
actually, I hate that question. Don't ask me how I'm doing. I don't know how I'm doing, right?
Yes.
But the idea that she's just coming over and she's like, "Okay, I'm kidnapping you and we're going to the beach." Um, I think that helping our loved ones, get out and go do things, or if you yourself are the one that's having to do it because you're untouchable, um, to be able to keep yourself going, your books are going to really help people. I want to bring into this equation. You live on Maui, yeah, and there was a massive, terrible thing that happened there with the death of people and also the destruction of a town. Would you talk about that a little bit? And I know that you're doing some things there to help with that grieving process, but yeah, please just share with us. Mhm.
Things like the wildfires that we experienced in Maui aren't something that you would anticipate. And people in general are not ready for something like that to happen. And you have no idea what you're going to do or how things are going to go when something like that happens. My experience was in the middle of the night, I started smelling smoke from my bedroom. And so I got up and went outside to look and see, looked around my house first because it was pretty strong. And I couldn't see anything. And I went online trying to see what's going on. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I kind of had to wait it out until the next morning when things started being available about what was going on. And what a lot of people don't realize is that, yes, Lahaina, the community of Lahaina, burned to the ground in a very short period of time. There were fires all over the island, and the fire that was close to me, it was about 2 miles away. It started before the Lahaina started, because it was Lahaina's happened later in the day, and this fire started in the middle of the night. So, and the fire that was close to me, I live on the side of Haleakala, the volcano. And when on mountains like that, you have deep grooves on the way down. When we make the volcano in school, it's always nice and smooth, but it's not that way. There's these deep grooves in the terrain. And the fire gets caught down in there because the firefighters can't reach it, and you just kind of have to let it burn itself out. And so that first fire that I experienced went on for well over a month until it kind of ran out of things to burned itself out there.
Wow.
But it did, in the process, burn homes and different things on my side of the island up country. Line is about a about a half an hour drive for me. So I wasn't smelling that smoke, but I was smelling the other smoke. And I have an apartment in my house here, and the person who usually lives there happened to be on the mainland, and she called me and she said, my friend's house, their neighborhood is burning, and they're being evacuated, and they don't have any place to go because there's two of them, and they have two dogs and two cats, and they don't want to leave their animals behind. And while there were shelters open, they would take like one pet per person, and they just weren't in the position to choose which one of their pets they were going to take care of. And so she said, since I'm not there, can they come stay in my place? And I said, sure, no problem. And they ended up staying about 6 weeks with me. And in their neighborhood, all but 3 houses burned all the way to the ground. And their house, their yard especially, was the yard was destroyed. There was nothing left there. And the house was damaged and took a lot of remediation before they were allowed to get back in. And there was a lot of work once it was time to get back in. So that I was up close and personal with the fire from the very first day with having that. And it felt so good to feel like I was doing something, that I was helping somebody. And the outpouring of love from the people who live on the island was amazing. Now, we have tons of visitors on the island all the time. They're just millions, literally, that far outnumbers the number of people who actually live on the island. And with that, those people that live here, I looked it up because I was curious when all this was going on, how could I equate that? And I discovered that the population of the island was the population of a town that I knew of in California that was a town. It wasn't like a city. It wasn't that big of a place. And that's the population of the whole island. Oh. So the outpouring of love and support from everybody pitched in and did something. Everybody was active. People started, if their thing was cooking, they started cooking right away and finding places to take the food. They were cleaning out their closets because people didn't have anything. And so there were tons of things. There was one church that's real centrally located on the island that kind of opened itself up for a depository of things that people wanted to donate. And anybody that needed anything could go there and take whatever they wanted. And there was whatever they needed was there because people were so generous and donated things that you don't think of, like diapers. you
Yeah.
know.
Yes.
There were lots of things, and they still have things there, and people still are going there because people still don't have homes. There's no way that the current housing on the island could absorb an entire community. And then we had people from off island that came, like World Central Kitchen was here, uh, feeding people, and people in the food industry, especially the ones that lived in the Lahaina area that they didn't have a job anymore, just came down there and cooked and helped people cook. But when you think of it, the whole community, like your post office is gone, your dry cleaner's gone, your where you go out to eat, your job is gone. Everything was just gone.
Wow.
But the compassion and kindness, the aloha spirit, so to speak,
Yes.
it was and is plentiful here, and it feels really good to be a part of that.
Yes, I appreciate you sharing that. I want you to talk a little bit about what you actually are doing with people and with the writing, the Grief and Happiness Alliance. And I'm really getting the sense of the importance of community, of working together. I mean, yeah, please go ahead. I know you have a lot to say.
Okay, well, the Grief and Happiness Alliance is something that I came up with, and I was trying to figure out how to do this happiness equation. And and what we did, it's a long story, so I can't tell it to you all, but I got together with a bunch of people from across the country and said, let's try this out and see if, because usually when you say grief and happiness, people go, those two words don't go together. You know, so I wanted to see if I could convince people that they did, and we did like a pilot program, and they loved the concept. And when we finished, I said, the thing is, I want to do this online so people from any place could come. And I want, doing something like that costs money. There's cost in charge, and I don't want to charge the people to come and have this kind of help. I felt really strongly about that. So they said, well, we'll just form a nonprofit organization and we'll cover everything. And that will give the people who are coming a perceived value that somebody is paying for this for them, like a scholarship to be able to come and get this support. And so we did that. And what the Alliance does is we meet every week for an hour on Zoom, and we write together. Then we break up into small groups and everybody gets to tell their story and talk about it in those small groups. And then we come back together and kind of share from those groups the overall things that people discovered. And then we learn a happiness practice. And the writing prompts are different every week. The happiness practices are different every week. And it really helps. So we're letting everybody know that that's available. It's not just available to the people on Maui, but people on Maui are coming. And the other thing that the Grief and Happiness Grief and Happiness Alliance nonprofit organization, that's a way too long, I realize now. It seemed good at the time. But
Yeah.
they've done something they call Maui Grief Relief, and that's on our website, which is griefandhappiness.com. And there, if people donate $25, then that equates a book, the Grief and Happiness Handbook, that we will give somebody on the island who's dealing with loss. They don't have to be from Lahaina, because there's loss to do with this all over the island. And it's been a really nice thing. It's a way that people can contribute something that they don't feel like they've got to get out their checkbook and write a $5,000 check or something. They can each, if everybody donated a book, it wouldn't take long before every person on the island had their own copy.
Yes. So it's called griefandhappiness.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Griefandhappiness.com. Everybody just write that down. Go to it right now. Check Emily out and the beautiful work she's doing. And this Zoom call, this weekly Zoom call for grieving and happiness, it can be joined from all over the world.
That's right.
Okay.
And right now, our time, we've got we did a survey to see what day and what time was going to be the best, and it turned out to be Sunday was the time most people could come. And it's right now 10 o'clock on Hawaii time, but that makes it noon on Pacific Coast time and 3 on East Coast time, and later than that in Europe. And we have international people every week that come. Every place from New Zealand to Saudi Arabia. Last week we had a couple of people from England and I think 3 people from Canada, and they all can come. And because we keep getting requests from other areas, because I can only handle so many people at a time, we created a facilitator training program that we're in the middle of doing right now, so that we will have more facilitators that can do the kind of thing that I do with facilitating the individual groups. And our intention with that is being able to have the groups in different time zones, so they still can be on Zoom, but the different days and different time zones makes it more available to anybody. And if we had 5 groups going, you could go to all 5 of them if you wanted to, on different days and different times.
Yeah. And I want to point out, we're down to the last 10 seconds or something of the show. I want to point out that grieving about anything, grieving about the condition of the world, grieving about what's happened in the last 4 years, grieving about people dying, passing away, maybe even unexpectedly, or for why, so yeah, Emily Thiroux Threatt, you have griefandhappiness.com, and also lovingandlivingyourwaythroughgrief.com. And one last word, super quick.
You can get through this, and you can be happy while you're grieving.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for being on the show. Everybody, enjoy your week. Love on your loved ones while they're here. And whoo-hoo, Super Bowl. Yes, Benny, it's happening. Benny, you're the best.